He remembers the sound before he remembers the scene. Not a shout, not a cry, just the soft hush of someone's breath leaving a room, the way a radio fades when a hand turns the dial without quite meaning to. In his mind, the evening folds over itself. A porch light humming over dry Texas dust, the sky the color of a worn-out denim shirt, and a name that still refuses to settle. Marrow, 28, a woman he never met in life and yet feels he has somehow lost. The first report called it a possible self-inflicted end. The second hinted it might not be that simple. Neither felt right to him, even now. The pages say one thing, the quiet between the words says something else. Back then, August 1975, the town of Valera, Texas, was small enough that any event seemed to ring through every kitchen, every church pew, every corner store. Yet this one felt different, wrapped in a reserved hush. A young woman found in her small rented house on the edge of cotton fields, the front door half open as if she had changed her mind about leaving. There were signs that could fit either story. A note that might have been a farewell, or might have been nothing of the sort, depending on how one chose to read it. A chair turned slightly, as though moved in haste or reconsideration. A window unlatched, curtain breathing in the soft midnight wind. The memory is not his, not truly. He was a child then, living 2 towns over. The details came later, through files, photographs, interviews, and the tired voices of people who had tried in their own ways to move on. Yet over the years, he has visited the scene so often in his mind that it feels like something he witnessed personally, a borrowed ghost, stitched into his own past. The first time he saw his photograph, he was 35 and new to the cold case unit. The picture was grainy, slightly overexposed. She stood beside an old pickup truck, the Texas sun laying a pale ring of light in her dark hair. She wasn't smiling fully, but there was something like one hovering at the corner of her mouth, as if she had just been interrupted in a private thought. "Victim," the label on the folder said. He stared at the word for a long time, wondering if it was a fact or a decision. Her background gathered in fragments. Born in L, moved throughout the state with a father who chased oil work and a mother who ran a small sewing business from whichever kitchen table they had that year. She studied literature at a modest college, never finished, took a job teaching at a church school for a while. People called her thoughtful, sometimes distant, sometimes unexpectedly warm. She wrote letters on thick paper, underlined sentences in library books, kept a notebook of songs and phrases she never showed anyone. By the time she reached Valera, she was working as a clerk at a local hardware store and giving evening Spanish lessons at the community center. She was, by all accounts, quiet but kind. That phrase appears in several statements, as if the town agreed on it and needed the reassurance of repetition. Quiet but kind, as though such a description could protect her from whatever happened next. The uncertainty of her last hours hangs over every page of the file. On one side, there are hints of inner struggle, a recent breakup, some letters never mailed, a sudden decision to live alone instead of with a friend. On the other, there are small signs of planning ahead, a new tin of coffee in the kitchen, a book on her nightstand marked halfway, a note reminding herself to call her sister about a visit in September. He has read the file so many times that the facts blur into feelings. Sometimes he believes she was simply overwhelmed, that the weight of unspoken thoughts finally pressed too hard. Sometimes he senses another presence in that room, someone who arrived carrying their own unsaid worries, someone who left with more than they brought. In his quieter moments, he admits that what unsettles him most is how easily both versions seem possible. The town learned to live with that uncertainty. Over the years, the case slipped into the background, mentioned only when older residents reached for a story about that sad thing back in the 70s. Some leaned toward the idea that she chose her own end, an explanation that gave the town a sense of distance, a belief that nothing truly dangerous had walked their streets. Others held a different suspicion in the private corners of their minds, a feeling that something happened that night which no one had the courage to name. He has worked many unresolved files, each with its own silence, but something about Story refuses to fade. Maybe it is the smallness of the town, the way a single event can change the shape of a community's memory. Maybe it is the way her image lingers, half smiling, half turned away. Maybe it is the note that might be a farewell, or simply a line she jotted down while reading. When he closes his eyes, he sees her sitting at a table after dusk, pen moving slowly across paper. There is a pause, a hesitation. Does she lift her eyes to the door expecting someone, or is she alone with the soft ticking of the wall clock? He does not know. What troubles him is that the story feels like a loss he carries personally, even though he never knew her. A loss whose shape keeps changing each time he thinks he understands it. Her death is both distant and close, recorded and yet somehow unwritten. It waits there in 1975 like a room where a lamp was left on and the door never fully closed. And although the file has sat for decades in a quiet cabinet, its presence has never truly gone away. It waits for something, a word, a memory, a small overlooked page, to breathe and rearrange its meaning. One day, finally, that happens. 2. A forgotten witness or document reopens the cold investigation. The box arrives without ceremony. Just an archivist's cart rolling down a hallway, a stack of cardboard that smells faintly of dust and old air. On the side, in faded ink, Valera PD 1971-979. He has not asked for it specifically. The reorganization of records is routine, an effort to clear space, to reorder years that have blurred together. Yet when the cart stops near his desk and the clerk says, "These might belong to you," he feels a small, unexplainable tightening in his chest. He opens the box without expectation. Inside are reports, traffic logs, minor complaints that never became anything more. He moves steadily, almost automatically, until a slim, misfiled envelope slips free from between two thicker folders and falls onto his lap. There is no label, only a date, August 19, 1975. The date speaks to him before the contents do. August 19, he knows, is 2 days after his body was found. He turns the envelope over carefully as if it might bruise. The flap is sealed with old tape, edges yellowed, a faint impression where a paperclip once rested and then disappeared. He opens it. Inside is a single handwritten statement on official stationery, the ink slightly faded but still readable. The heading bears a name he does not recognize immediately. Elias Harper, age 61, retired mail carrier. Below that, in neat, deliberate script, is a short account of something seen on the night of August 17, 1975. Elias writes that he could not sleep. The heat had clung to the evening, and he stepped outside around midnight to sit on his porch and watch the road. From that porch, he had a partial view of the lane that led toward the small rental houses beyond the cotton fields, the lane where lived. He notes seeing a car he did not recognize drive slowly down that lane around 12:30. Not one of the usual local trucks. A darker car, maybe navy or black, with a slight rattle in its engine. He remembers the sound distinctly because the night was so still. He notes that the car did not leave for quite some time, maybe an hour, maybe more. He had gone inside at some point to refill his water and could not be exact. Still, he is sure about the arrival, less sure about the departure. At the bottom, in a careful line, he adds a sentence that feels fragile even before the investigator fully understands why. I did not want to cause any trouble, but I also did not wish to stay quiet if what I saw could help. The statement is signed, dated, and stamped with a receiving mark from the Valera Police Department, August 20, 1975. There is no follow-up attached, no additional report, no indication that anyone ever spoke to Elias again. The page seems to exist by itself, a lone voice written down and then softly set aside. He reads it 3 times, then leans back in his chair, the room around him thinning into the hum of the air conditioner. In itself, the document does not prove anything. People visit one another late at night for many reasons. Cars break down. Friends bring news. Lovers argue and reconcile and sometimes sit in parked vehicles, trying to understand their own hearts. Still, the timing is striking, and the quiet of the document's disappearance unsettles him. Why was this statement not in the original case file? Why did no one mention it in the review summaries? He imagines the possibilities. A clerk misplaces it in the wrong year. A distracted officer slides it between unrelated reports, telling himself he will return to it later. A superior decides it is too vague to pursue, not unkindly, but out of some weary sense of limited time and resources. None of those choices are cruel. Each is ordinary, yet together they create an opening where uncertainty grows. He learns, with a brief search, that Elias passed away many years ago. There will be no new conversation, no fresh recollection. Still, something in the phrasing of the man's written words feels present. The careful way he tried to balance not wanting to disturb the peace of his town with a sincere wish not to stay silent. That sentence resonates with the investigator in a way he does not fully share with anyone. It reminds him of how many people he has met who hover at the edge of speaking, worried that their memories will be misunderstood, or that numbing what they saw will change how they are seen. The discovery of the statement by itself does not transform the case into something clear. If anything, it complicates it. The more he sits with it, the more he feels as though he is being invited not into certainty, but into a deeper, older uncertainty. He requests the full Valera records from that week, focusing not only on the official investigation into his death, but on the small things that happened around it. Noise complaints, minor disputes, anything that might suggest who drove an unfamiliar car out toward the rental houses that night. As the papers arrive, filling his desk with their pale weight, he notices a pattern that is not about names or times but about silence. Certain things were written down, others were left implied, as if the town itself wanted to handle parts of the story privately. A neighbor who mentioned hearing raised voices, then retracted the comment. A friend who began to say that had seemed unusually reflective in the weeks before, then paused and chose a gentler word. A family member who traveled in from another city for the small service, then left again without leaving a statement. This is the second layer of the case, not the events themselves, but the ways people stepped toward them and then away, trying to preserve an uneasy peace. The forgotten document does more than reopen a file. It reawakens a mood. He feels it as he walks to his car after work, the Texas sky now modern and electric with distant freeway lights and cell towers, yet somehow holding a trace of that older night. He imagines Elias on his porch, watching the road, wondering whether what he saw mattered enough to disturb the calm. In that image, he recognizes something shared, a reluctance to harm the fragile balance of other people's lives, and a parallel fear that silence may, in its own way, leave a mark. He opens a new notebook, writes the date, and beneath it a simple line. Every story begins again when someone chooses not to stay quiet. He does not yet know that reopening the case will unsettle people who had convinced themselves the past was safely arranged. He only feels that quiet, persistent pull toward a woman who has become both a symbol and a person in his thoughts, someone whose last night remains half in shadow, waiting not for a solution, but for an honest look at its complexity. 3. Investigator focuses on human psychology more than physical clues. His name is Daniel Mercer, though in most reports he appears only as D. Mercer, another set of initials beneath the lines. In the unit, he is known for listening more than speaking, for asking questions that often sound less like inquiries and more like invitations. He begins not with the scene, but with the people. By the time he visits Valera, the house where lived has long been replaced. The original structure was torn down in the late 80s. A newer, brighter home sits there now, with a trimmed lawn and a wind chime that sings in the mild breeze. There is nothing physical left to read, no scuffed floorboard, no faded mark on the wall. He stands at the edge of the property line anyway, imagining how the rooms were arranged, not in a forensic sense but in a human one. Where would she have placed a chair to catch the morning light? Which window might she have opened when the air felt too still? Did she prefer the quiet of late hours, or did she tire easily at the end of the day? He sketches the answers in the margins of his notebook. It may never be possible to confirm them, yet the process helps him hold her in his mind as more than a name on a file. When he asks for interviews with those who knew her, he is careful with his phrasing. He does not lead with questions about the final night. Instead, he asks, what was she like when she felt at ease? And how did she speak when she was excited about something? People respond differently to this kind of focus. One of her former from the hardware store, a woman named Mary Ellen, fidgets with her bracelet as she talks. She listened more than she talked, Mary Ellen says, then stops, as if aware that this sounds too simple. I mean, she would talk, but only after she'd heard you out, like she was weighing what to say, making sure it fit. Did that ever make people uneasy? Daniel asks. Mary Ellen hesitates. There is a pause in which the room seems to hold its breath. Sometimes, she admits. You know how folks can be. We're used to quick replies. When someone waits, you start wondering what they're thinking. What did you think she was thinking? He asks gently. Another pause, another small shift in her gaze. I thought she saw more than she let on, she answers at last, like she noticed things about people they didn't say out loud. Daniel writes the phrase down, saw more than she let on. It matters to him because in his experience, people who observe quietly often carry burdens others do not recognize. They become keepers of delicate truths, silent witnesses to small tensions that never quite surface. Such people can be deeply appreciated or unexpectedly resented. He meets younger sister in a 2 towns over. She is older now, with silver in her dark hair, yet there is a resemblance that catches him off guard. The same careful eyes, the same way of holding a cup as if reluctant to disturb its surface. I've told this story before, she says softly, stirring her coffee though she no longer adds sugar. Over the years, people ask. Sometimes reporters call. I never know how much to say. Say what feels right to say, Daniel replies. We can stop whenever you like. She looks at him for a moment, as if measuring his tone. I don't think she wanted to leave, says finally. That's the part I've never been able to accept. She had plans, small ones maybe, but they were real. She was going to visit me. She talked about taking some evening classes again. She started writing more too. Writing what? Thoughts, observations, not quite stories. She called them fragments. Did she share them with you? Only a few, says, and her voice trembles just slightly. The rest she kept in a notebook. I never saw it after. Daniel does not press. He can sense another layer there, a feeling that something precious was left behind and then misplaced, both literally and emotionally. What kind of person was she with people she cared about? He asks instead. Smiles faintly. Gentle, she says, but firm when it mattered. She forgave easily, maybe too easily. Too easily. Well, says, fingers tightening around her cup, when you forgive everyone, some take advantage of it. She does not elaborate, and he does not force her to. The pause between them says enough. There were people in life who leaned on her understanding, perhaps more than they should have. In the evenings, back in his motel room, Daniel reviews his notes not for timelines or specific contradictions, but for emotional patterns. He circles words like hesitant, careful, forgave, saw more than she let on. He underlines every mention of how others felt around her, comforted, unsettled, watched over, or quietly challenged. His approach raises questions among some of his colleagues. Any luck with your feelings-based method? One of them asks with a light laugh over the phone. It's not about feelings for their own sake, Daniel answers calmly. I'm trying to understand the roles people played in her life, the ways they saw her and the ways she saw them. And that's going to tell you what happened. It might tell me why it happened, he says, and sometimes that's the only part that can still be understood. He knows that physical evidence, had it survived, would offer clearer lines. But with time, those lines have blurred. What remains are the impressions people carry, the way their voices change when they say her name, the small corrections they make mid-sentence. He notices, for instance, that several people begin to say she was happy and then amend it. She seemed content, I guess. She was calm, maybe too calm. She was fine as far as I could tell. These small shifts interest him more than any fingerprint ever could. They suggest an uncertainty that existed even then, a sense that her inner world was not readily accessible to those around her. If people were unsure about her happiness, what did that mean for their sense of responsibility toward her? Did they feel they should have asked more questions, looked more closely, offered more comfort? Or did they rely on her composed outer self to reassure them that all was well? He begins to see the case not only as a question of what occurred in that house, but as a tapestry of quiet decisions, things people chose not to ask, not to notice, not to say. Late one night, he sits on the edge of his motel bed and allows himself a thought he usually avoids. If someone did approach her that night, did they come believing they were helping or believing they were justified? Did they leave thinking they had done nothing wrong? He knows from experience that people rarely cast themselves as harmful in their own stories. More often, they speak of misunderstanding, of unintended outcomes, of moments that slipped away from their control. Their words may be incomplete, but they are rarely entirely empty. So he keeps listening. With each conversation, he feels less certain about any single explanation, yet more attuned to the subtle tensions that surround its life. A neighbor once felt ignored. A friend felt gently challenged by her moral clarity. A former partner felt both cherished and quietly judged. These are not concrete clues. They are human contradictions, love that carries silent disappointment, loyalty laced with envy, concern that avoids uncomfortable truths. As he gathers them, the picture of her final days does not sharpen. It deepens. The mystery remains, but it now includes not only the question of what happened in a room one night in 1975, but the quieter question of how a town, a family, a circle of friends all learned to live alongside a story they never fully allowed themselves to understand. And though he cannot yet say it aloud, Daniel begins to sense that whatever he uncovers may bring understanding without comfort, clarity without peace. The truth, he suspects, will come wearing the quiet face of ordinary choices, not the dramatic mask of a single decisive act. The deeper Daniel walks into his past, the more he begins to sense a soft trembling at the edges of every story told about her. Not fear, nothing sharp or pointed, but an emotional imbalance, as though the people in her life once leaned toward her warmth and now lean away from their memories of it, shifting under the quiet weight of their own hearts. He begins with those closest to her in Valera during the last year of her life. Not suspects, he reminds himself, simply people shaped by her presence. And yet, the moment he steps into their recollections, he feels the gentle strain of something unspoken threading beneath their words. There was Samuel, the local carpenter whose workshop once stood behind the community center. He had taken Spanish lessons from on Thursday evenings, always arriving early and lingering afterward. Not for romance, he claims, but for the calming sense of order she seemed to bring to any space she filled. When she spoke, he tells Daniel, eyes lowered as though watching the memory unfold on the floor between them, it felt like she was arranging the world into something clearer. But, Daniel asks, sensing the hesitation that has settled like dust between them. Samuel exhales softly, shoulders tightening by only a breath. But sometimes I felt I disappointed her, not through anything I did, but perhaps through things I never said. What kinds of things? He gives a quiet, almost fragile smile. Feelings, maybe, or worries. She listened so deeply that I felt my silence mattered to her more than my words. The idea touches Daniel more than he admits. The notion that someone's quiet understanding can unintentionally become a mirror in which others face themselves. Next, he speaks with Lydia Hart, the friend who had once offered a room before she chose to rent her own house instead. Lydia's voice is soft, slower than expected, as though she is cautious not to disturb the memory she holds. She wanted her own place, Lydia says, but I always wondered if she felt torn about it. She loved company but also needed quiet. I think she struggled to choose between the two. Did that create distance between you? Lydia's jaw shifts slightly, not in discomfort, but in something subtler, something thoughtful. A little, she admits. Not because either of us wished for it, but because when someone steps into their own space, you begin to wonder if they're stepping away from you in other ways too. Daniel notes the gentle melancholy in her tone, not jealousy, but a small ache of feeling slightly replaced by solitude itself. Then there is Mark, who once dated briefly the spring before she passed. He speaks carefully, words chosen as though each carries weight. She had this way of understanding people, he begins. That made you want to be better, but it also made you aware of your flaws in ways you didn't expect. Did that trouble you? A pause settles, a long, meaningful one that Daniel does not interrupt. It challenged me, Mark finally says, and sometimes I didn't know how to rise to that challenge. Daniel watches him as he says this, noticing the way Mark's gaze drifts toward the window, toward a horizon that existed long before and long after that summer. It is not guilt he sees there, but reflection, deep, quiet reflection. As Daniel gathers these accounts, he realizes each one bends in a slightly different direction, but together they form a tender, complicated picture. A woman who inspired trust, yet also stirred self-doubt. A woman whose gentle clarity made others see themselves with sharper honesty. A woman who seemed to offer peace, yet somehow invited unresolved emotions to surface. No one speaks of conflict. No one speaks of anger. Yet Daniel senses that within these calm waters, subtle currents once moved, currents strong enough to shift the course of someone's unseen emotion. He feels no accusation rising from these stories, only a growing awareness that emotional closeness can be as intricate as any hidden motive, and far more fragile. What troubles him is not what anyone did, but what they felt. And that, he realizes, is where the story will eventually turn. For in each relationship, friendship, mentorship, brief romance, there is a small, quiet space where honesty hesitated. A space where a single, unspoken thought might have grown into something unintended. And Daniel begins to wonder if the truth he seeks is not an action, but a feeling left unattended too long. 5. Old secrets unfold, revealing betrayal and hidden personal motives. The first secret reveals itself not through confession but through tone, a subtle tremor in a voice, like a string plucked too gently to produce a full note. Daniel hears it while speaking again with sister, on a day warmed by mild sunlight and softened by long shadows. They sit near the window of the same as before, warm light touching the table between them. Tries to speak of her sister's gentleness again, but this time her expression carries a delicate strain. "There's something I haven't said," she murmurs, not because it was hidden, maybe because it was hard to accept. Daniel meets her gaze without pushing. "She once wrote me a letter," says, fingers brushing the rim of her cup. "A long one, but she never sent it." What was in it? She wrote about feeling uncertain around someone she cared about deeply. Not afraid, just unsure whether her presence offered comfort or stirred something unresolved in them. Daniel listens carefully. "Did she name them?" "No," answers, her voice still gentle. "But she said she sometimes carried other people's sadness too easily, that she didn't know how to set it down without hurting them." This soft admission changes something in the room. Not the facts, those remain as diffuse as ever, but the emotional landscape shifts. Was not simply loved or admired. She was leaned upon, trusted, and perhaps, unknowingly, weighted by the expectations of others. Later, Daniel finds another quiet thread, this time in the community center archives, where a volunteer hands him an old folder from 1975. Inside are notes from Spanish classes, lists of names, schedules, and tucked within them, nearly forgotten, a short, carefully folded page. He opens it with a patience bordering on reverence. It is not a letter, not a confession, just a few lines written in handwriting he recognizes from the earlier files. Some kindness carries another meaning. Some silence carries another wish. "I must learn the difference, or I will lose myself." Daniel reads the lines several times. They are tender, fragile, and yet they contain a quiet complexity that hints at emotional entanglements she never outwardly expressed. He continues visiting people whose paths crossed hers, and each conversation adds another layer, not of wrongdoing, but of longing, uncertainty, or misread intentions. Samuel remembers a moment weeks before her passing when she seemed distant, not cold, just contemplative, as if trying to protect him from something she couldn't quite name. Lydia recalls an evening when visited her unannounced, asking gentle questions about friendships that shift over time. She wasn't looking for answers, Lydia says. She was looking for clarity in herself. Mark, the former partner, reveals he once tried to rekindle their connection, but had stepped back kindly, saying she needed space to understand her own heart. Each story shares a quiet resemblance. People cared for her, yet each in their own way felt something delicate and unfinished between them. It is not betrayal in the common sense, no deception, no harsh intentions, but rather the softer, more human kind. Expectations not expressed, hopes not named, feelings that lived between glances instead of words. Daniel begins to understand that the emotional terrain surrounding final days was not flat. It was layered, gently, subtly, by the very people who loved her. Not one of them intentionally caused harm. Yet each carried a private wish, doubt, or longing they never voiced. And in those quiet spaces, truths shifted. Not sharply, just enough to blur the edges of understanding. Felt it. He can sense that now, like a delicate vibration running through the final entries she never meant for anyone else to read. She was surrounded by affection, yes, but also by the subtle pressure of others' unspoken needs. And sometimes, Daniel thinks, the heart can be overwhelmed not by conflict, but by the tender weight of being someone's quiet answer. The revelation does not lead him closer to solving the case, at least not in a traditional sense. But it draws him nearer to understanding the emotional atmosphere of that last summer, where every smile carried a shadow and every silence held meaning. Here lies the truth that unsettles him most. No one meant to place her in such a delicate position. But someone did. Gently, unknowingly, through love that blurred into dependence. And that is the kind of truth that does not point to guilt, only to the complexity of human hearts. 6. Twist exposes the innocent as manipulative and morally complex. The twist does not arrive like a revelation. It comes quietly, soft as the turning of a page, gentle as a sigh, when Daniel revisits a detail he once dismissed as ordinary, the small notebook kept of her fragments. It was never found. But 3 different people mentioned it to him. 3 thoughtful, honest people who remembered it differently. Samuel believed she wrote reflections about her days. Lydia recalled it as a place where she jotted inspiration for lessons. Thought used it for emotions she was not ready to share. 3 versions of one object, and one uneasiness beneath all their recollections. So Daniel returns to the archives. Not the police records this time, but a modest community storage room behind the old library. The volunteer who helped him earlier hands him a thin box with a smile that seems unaware of its significance. Inside, old teaching materials, faded handouts, and at the bottom, almost hidden, a small cloth-bound book. He opens it carefully. The handwriting is unmistakably hers. But the words are not what he expected. They are gentle, yes, but layered with deeper insight than anyone had understood. Each fragment touches upon the emotional currents around her, capturing people with tenderness, clarity, and at times an unsettling precision. One entry stands out, written weeks before she passed. Some hearts ask for comfort without saying so. Some ask for truth but do not wish to hear it. Some ask to be needed more than I can offer. I cannot hold every wish without losing my own voice. Daniel breathes in slowly. This is not the writing of someone lost, but of someone navigating others' quiet needs with remarkable awareness. She understood more than anyone believed. Perhaps too much. Another fragment reads, I see when someone's care shifts into expectation. I see when a word of kindness carries another hope. I see when someone needs me to be their answer. And beneath it, I cannot be that. It becomes clear, not in a sharp, dramatic way, but in a soft, almost melodic unfolding. That was not simply the gentle figure everyone remembered. She was insightful, deeply perceptive, and this quiet perception may have influenced those around her in ways no one realized. She could make people feel understood, but also gently exposed. She guided conversations subtly. She redirected emotional tension with kindness so calm it almost disguised itself. Her grace was not manipulation, but the effect it had on others. The sense of being seen too clearly may have stirred something delicate in more than one heart. Mark mentions it when Daniel revisits him. "She could read me," he says softly, "not in a harsh way, but sometimes she understood me better than I understood myself. That's a tender thing, but it's also a lot. Not harmful, not cold, just human, complex in a way that made others question their own reflections in her gaze." And Daniel realizes the twist is not about blame. It is about the shifting balance of emotional influence. People once thought she was the quiet, receptive one. But in truth, she shaped hearts around her more than she admitted, more than they understood. Not through force, but through gentle clarity. A clarity some cherished. A clarity some found comforting. A clarity some were not ready to confront. The twist is not that she manipulated, but that her insight, expressed softly, may have unsettled someone who relied on unspoken truths to remain unexamined. And in that fragile space where emotional honesty meets human uncertainty, someone may have reached for comfort, understanding, or closeness, only to find themselves facing their own unspoken heart instead. A moment like that can shift a night, change a conversation, alter the air in a room, not through harm, but through the delicate trembling of two human souls trying to understand themselves. I saw too much. Someone else felt too exposed. And the truth, however gentle, can unsettle even the kindest intentions. No crime, no blame, just the quiet complexity of emotional connection that became too heavy for one heart to hold. 7 concludes with open-ended moral tone, hiding truth saves someone. In the end, Daniel sits alone in his office as dusk eases across the walls, turning them the warm color of fading memory. The case file lies open before him, not solved, not closed, but understood in a way that brings neither triumph nor sorrow, only a quiet acceptance. He has pieced together everything he can. There was no clear wrongdoing, no accusation he can make with an honest heart. Just the tender, intricate weave of emotions that brought several lives together, and one life to a moment no one fully witnessed. He knows who felt closest to her that night, who may have visited, who may have spoken too softly or too honestly for the moment to hold. He knows, too, that this person carries a gentle regret, not for a harmful act, but for a conversation that drifted in a direction neither intended. He could name it. He could pursue it. He could unravel the fragile balance of a life, already shaped by decades of quiet reflection. But doing so would bring no peace, no clarity, only the echo of an old misunderstanding carried into a new generation. So he does something unexpected. He closes the file, not because the truth is hidden, but because revealing it would change nothing, and soften nothing, and would quiet a story that already speaks in the softest of voices. In his final notes he writes, "Some truths heal through being known. Some truths heal through being kept gentle in the dark. He steps outside into the evening air. The sky is wide and calm, holding the last light like a secret it doesn't mind carrying a little longer. He thinks of, not as a mystery, but as someone who lived with a rare emotional insight that both warmed and unsettled the hearts around her. He thinks of the people who loved her quietly, each in their own unspoken way. He thinks of the delicate line between understanding and being understood, and how that line can tremble without ever breaking. As he walks toward his car, he feels neither closure nor unrest. Just the sense of a story that asked to be felt rather than solved. A story where kindness shaped truth, and truth shaped silence, and silence saved someone who was never meant to carry more than their own gentle regret. The wind moves softly across the parking lot, carrying with it the faintest hint of warmth from the day. A reminder that some endings are not resolutions, but quiet acknowledgments of the complexity of being human. And somewhere in the depths of that quiet, story settles, not fully known, not fully gone, just softly resting between understanding and memory. Unfinished, but no longer alone.